Hey guys, Thibs here, and we're gonna be doing a Arcane Mage guide here today. Now, I want to get into this Arcane Mage guide in great detail because when it comes to the Arcane Mage rotation, it is fairly simple, and yet if you screw up, it really hurts. And like the burn and the sustain phase are like covered in every Arcane Mage guide, and I will be covering it also in this guide, alongside with how to gear your Arcane Mage, talents and glyphs you want to be using, obviously the rotations and the nuances to playing Arcane Mage in this patch. And this is a 6.2 patch Arcane Mage guide. After the guide is done, I will be doing a little bit extra on my weak auras, which I will put a link to in the video. Yeah, so let's get started. We're gonna start off with gearing. So like what's important, like gear wise, when it comes to Arcane Mage. Well, mainly, as you can see, I have enchanted everything and socketed everything with haste, because you just want a lot of haste. This is important because of the trinkets, both of them actually. First of all, let's cover the class trinket, which is really important. Currently I am using a Heroic Warforged one that is on 736 item level with Valor upgrades, and that basically gives me my arcane power, increased damage and reduced cast time and global cooldown by 37%. Now this affects very much into your rotation during your burn phase, and also which talents are better to use, actually specifically in one of the talents, which we'll be covering later. Prophecy of Fear is basically the best trinket you can have for Arcane Mage. Like, even though you might think, oh yeah, like during BRF, during 6.1, Mastery was the most important trinket to, like, most important stat to have, and then like you would want the Council trinket with a lot of Mastery. No, this is the trinket you want, and I will be going into further detail about that during the nuance section of this guide. Now, you want the 4 set, obviously, with the Archimond head as a offset, and the other pieces like the shoulders, chest, gloves and legs as your main tier sets. And let's get into the tier set. So every time you cast Arcane Missiles, you have a 35% chance to create a time anomaly, summoning a random hero through time to assist you for 10 seconds in battle. Now, basically the 2 sets on its own is really shit, because those time anomalies don't really do that much damage. They're like little uncontrollable pets that don't really do that much damage, but they're nice to have because of the 4 set bonus, because for each of the heroes summoned by the anomaly, your damage is increased by 12%. Now, there are 4 different types of them, but it is fairly impossible to get all 4 of them up at the same time and make it effective. It is possible to get all 3 if you get really lucky, and well, that's basically a 36% damage boost on its own for a couple of seconds, because like for 7 seconds or so, depending on how fast you can get your arcane missiles out. Now, I will be covering in the nuance section why haste over mastery. It has a lot of reasons. Mainly, it's the trinkets and your burn phase and what's it called? The legendary ring. Now, as most pure DPS classes, you have 3 damage specs. You have Frost, Fire, and Arcane. And why is Arcane always pulling such big numbers? And there's a very important reason to that. It is the legendary ring, mostly. This is because legendary ring has a 2-minute cooldown, and all your burn phase cooldowns have a 1.5 cooldown. So that means you will have your DPS cooldowns up for each and every single ring. Aside from the fact that the DPS cooldowns themselves do an amazing amount of damage on their own, pumping all of that damage into every single ring is just amazing. Now, let's get to what talents you want to be using, and also some situational talents. Now, looking at the level 15 talents, Blazing Speed I personally find to have no place in PvE, and that has a little bit to do with the one of the glyphs that are basically a must-have. The reason for this, at least it is a personal preference, but this is my reasoning behind it. Blazing Speed is a burst displacement, just like Blink. It can allow you to get somewhere really fast, and yeah, like, the only problem I have with it is that to move you cannot be casting, and that's why I like ice flows. If I need to do a rapid displacement somewhere, I will use my blinks. If I need to make small positional adjustments, ice flows just allows me to keep casting and not drop any DPS. So this is why I find it better. Evanescence is a situational one, and I do use it. I will be getting into that during the nuance section. It has its place, but not in most fights. Most fights I just use ice flows. I think it's the best talent out of the level 15 ones. The level 30 talents all the time for PV, as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much useless. I like to use Flame Glows, 2 reasons, because in Hellfire Citadel, whether you're raiding normal, heroic, or mythic, a lot of the mechanics of the bosses is ticking damage, small ticking damage that constantly happens, and Flame Glows allows you to passively absorb it. The second reason is Ice Barrier. Like, with the amount of intellect I have right now, it's only a 50k shield. It's not that big. I mean, like, if you know there's gonna be a big damage burst, it's good to have, but the second reason is really that it costs me a global cooldown, and I do not like this. The level 45 talents are pretty much up for grabs. I mean, Ice Ward isn't really that useful, neither is Frostjaw. I like to use Ring of Frost. There are certain situations, certain bosses I actually used on, for example, Mythic Socratar. We basically block the ghosts with this, so it's just a good CCing tool when you have to mass CC ads that are on top of each other, or you need to mass interrupt cast to CCable ads. The level 60 talent I generally use Greater Invisibility. Now, aside from the fact that the invisibility is instant instead of going channeling over 3 seconds, and it only has a 1.5 minute cooldown, it also is a good personal cooldown at that point. it gives you a 90% damage reduction, which is basically like Shadow Priest dispersion. It is really amazing, and it removes two dots off of you. So if you have 2 dots on you, you can basically remove them yourself, even if other people are not able to dispel them due to the mechanics, which is amazing. And there are a few more nuances to it, which I could get into later. But generally, for most fights, I use this. Quarterize, I don't really like. I do use it on one specific fight, and that is Mythic Zul'Harak, and I'll get into that with the nuance section of it, because there is some thought behind it. But generally for PvE it's a really bad talent, because in theory it puts you on 7% health, and that's what healers need to heal back up, that extra 28% of your health that you're gonna burn off. So generally it's like, if you're new to playing mage or leveling or something, it's a good thing to have, because it can actually save your life. But rating wise, it is not a good talent, except in specific instances. Cold Snap is viable. It's a 22% of your health heal, and it resets your ice block, which is really nice. It's really nice if you need to double ice block to cheese mechanics, or if you're not feeling completely comfortable with playing Greater Invis and just want that extra ice block. It's a really good talent to have. I personally don't use it that much, but it does have its place. Now we get to the level 75 talent. Right now I'm using Unstable Magic, and this is the way to go. Nether Tempest would be like, you know, like a Living Bomb or Frost Bomb kind of thing, so that would be like an AoE ability. But if you need heavy AoE, it's better to run with Supernova. But there is a reason why Unstable Magic is the most important, the best talent out of the 3 on the level 75 talent there. And this is the reason. It's the class trinket. Because the class trinket, in combination with the prismatic crystal, you want to be doing as much arcane blast on that crystal as possible. Even though like putting a supernova on a crystal is really strong, it's better to run with Unstable Magic, because arcane blasts during arcane power get an increased damage because of the class trinket, and they cast faster, and in my case they cast faster than Supernova's global cooldown. Bear in mind that the class trinket only affects the global cooldown of arcane blast, so me arcane blasting 0.7 seconds, 0.8, 0.9, depending on whether I have time warp, Mark of the Warsong proc, whatever. Technically a arcane blast is faster during the burn phase, during using your cooldowns. So getting that 15% chance to do 50% additional damage, which is registered as a separate spell, but you do it on the crystal, and it will AoE around the crystal because of the crystal and because of itself. So it will do it's like basically an extra arcane blast almost, in a sense, on the crystal, which is really, really amazing. For the level 90 talents, Mirror Image doesn't really do much. Incanter's Flow is a little bit of a lazy talent. There is some nuance to it when it comes to the burn phase, but generally speaking, I use it the most because there's a lot of moving around in a lot of the fights. If there are specific fights like Thorlord Schoon and I'm fulfilling a specific role of soaking, which I always do, Rune of Power is better to go because during most of that fight I will be standing in. I'm pretty much locked to one spot. I'm not allowed to move for most of the fight, so Rune of Power would be better on that one. For the level 100 talent Overpower, there's no really a need during your burn phase to extend your arcane power. The time you have is more than enough to do damage with those 15 seconds. So Crystal is the way to go. There is an argument to be made on a cleave fight if you want to go the cleave spec to go Arcane Orb, but personally I don't really like it. I'd rather run Fire spec at that point than actually specking into Arcane Orb. So Prismatic Crystal, extra 30% damage is amazing for pretty much every fight, and it's basically used on every. I've just used it on every fight I go Arcane on. When it comes to glyphs, I have Glyph of Arcane Explosion. I just put that in as an extra glyph. I do tend to use Arcana Explosions on like imps on Mythic Manor, so I have a little bit extra range on it, so in case they're really spread, I still hit them all. The Glyph of Slow, which gives your Arcane Blast always the slow effect from your slow spell passively on targets that are obviously slowable. So why I use this is I use this basically because certain fights, like for example Core Fiend, where you have the skeletons chasing after people, during your standard DPS rotation they will be slowed, and if you get sent into his belly and need to kill the skeletons inside, they will be also massively slowed, and you have more time to bring them down before they actually reach the middle. So this is a really good glyph to have specifically for that fight, but there isn't really anything else you want. Glyph of Rapid Displacement gives your Blink 2 charges. This is a must-have glyph. This is why I do not spec into Blazing Speed, because having 2 charges of Blink is just all the mass mobility you need. For the small like repositions, I use Ice Flows, and that's why I really like that combo. It's really amazing. Okay, enough about talents and glyphs. Let's get into the rotations. Now, as every Arcane Mage guide will tell you, Arcane Mages have 2 phases. One of them is the burn phase, which is basically where you do most of your damage, and the other is a sustain phase. Now, the thing is, getting a lot of damage with a decent amount of gear out of Arcane Mage is fairly simple. I mean, like, it's not that hard. The burn phase is fairly easy, but the sustain phase is the tricky part, because you have to keep your mana at a certain level due to the mastery, which says for the amount of mastery you have, that's how much bonus damage you get based upon how full your mana bar is. Now, the thing with that is that if you don't keep track of your arcane charges, your rotation, your sustain rotation, you will lose too much of your mana, and your sustained damage will be fairly lower. And even though during most fights most of your damage comes out of your burn phase, and that is fairly simple to see on the damage meter. Now, the only current damage meter I've saved is a Hansgar and Frasnok 18 seconds fight we did. It was basically on heroic, where we were doing the achievements like the Stamp Revolution, and we killed it in 18 seconds. We did it with 2 Arcane Mages and 2 Warlocks, pulling the highest DPS, and you will be able to see in the specifics of the damage that my top damage is my crystal. Now, the crystal is alive only for 12 seconds on the ground, which means that all of this damage happened in 12 seconds. The Doom Nova is the trinket proc from the Prophecy of Fear, the Nithramus is obviously the trinket, and the Unstable Magic is the talent, and Arcane Blast, well, it only did a little bit because I only got a few Arcane Blasts in on the boss itself to build up Arcane charges, and the rest went on the Prismatic Crystal. The thing is, on the damage meters, whatever damage you do directly to the Prismatic Crystal, so whether it be an Arcane Blast, an Arcane Missile, Doom Nova, or even the Ring Explosion, will all be registered as Prismatic Crystal damage, right? From this damage meter you won't be able to properly see it because it's only an 18-second fight, but generally when you look at damage meters for Arcane Mages, their top damage will be like their Prismatic Crystal and then like their Arcane Blast. So you have to think of it this way, right? Every minute and a half for about 12 to 15 seconds, an Arcane Mage will do a gigantic amount of damage into the crystal, and after that it's just a bit of sustained damage for the next, 1 minute and like 35 seconds, 37 seconds, depending. Or actually 2 minutes, because you only want to use your cooldowns during the ring. Now, the burn phase. The burn phase is basically where you pump as much Arcane Blasts into your crystal while Arcane Power is up and the ring is up and possibly Time Warp and a potion, and you just want to be maxing damage and not really caring about your mana pool. The sustain phase is a little bit different, because you want to be dropping the charges by using Arcane Barrages. Now, in most fights, you will open with your burn phase, because the ring is usually popped on pull, and in a lot of cases Time Warp is also popped on the pull. So let's get into that. Now, seeing I can stand still, I'm just gonna spec really quickly into good old Rune of Power and drop one. As you can see, my weak aura's changed. I have a little weak aura that tells me if I'm standing inside the Arcane Power or not. But yeah, so basically the way I'm just gonna go verbally through the opener of the burn phase, of the opener with the burn phase with the countdown timer verbally, and then we're gonna have a look at how it looks in practice. During the pull timer, at about 4 seconds, you want to start casting your your Rune of Powers if you're spec'd into it, to drop them, so you have maximum uptime before you have to recast them. And then you want to pre-pot and start casting your first Arcane Blast on your target, and then you do the ring, the Arcane Power, and Time Warp if necessary, if the boss fight allows it, and then you drop your crystal and start spamming the Arcane Blast. Well, actually is better to after your first Arcane Blast to drop the crystal instantly, because it does trigger a global cooldown, and then during that global cooldown you can pop ring, Arcane Power, Time Warp, everything, and start raping your crystal with a lot of damage. And then once those 15 seconds of the Arcane Power and ring are up, You evocate your mana back up to full, which should only take 2 ticks. When you're around 30% mana with 4 arcane charges, you need two channel ticks from from evocation to actually get full full mana again. But if Time Warp is active, you have a lot more haste, and Arcane Mage's mana regen is based upon their haste, so you could be with Time Warp and get your full mana back in 2 ticks. Plus the ticks are faster, so you have less downtime when it comes to that. Now, why only cast 1 Arcane Blast and then pop the crystal and start spamming with all your cooldowns is because of the Prophecy of Fear. You wanted to proc on the crystal to get as much damage onto the crystal and the adjacent targets from the crystal. Okay, so I will be covering that a little bit more, the whole Doom Nova proc in the nuance section, but generally this is what it looks like.
Five, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I got a proc on the other thing. I can put a few arcane missiles in there before I go back on the crystal. And then we keep blow up and regen back up, and then we go into sustain phase.
Will be saved.
And there we go. And then let's see here. Now we can clearly see that Arcane Blast barely did any damage, and most of my damage came from the crystal and the ring. Now, seeing this was very short, this was 42 seconds. It's basically always the crystal that will be on top. Like, it just does a lot of damage. Within that 12 seconds it did almost 5 million damage, and it wasn't even the perfect rotation. The big problem was the trinket procced on my first Arcane Blast, which can happen, but a lot of the times it really doesn't. So you'll do that 1 Arcane Blast and then drop your crystal and then start spamming on to the crystal and hoping to get a Doom Nova proc. I do have to note that if you get a Doom Nova proc on your crystal, it is more viable to cast Arcane Missiles onto your crystal than Arcane Blasts. Even though you'll also be pumping in Arcane Blasts, do try and get as much Arcane Missiles in on that Doom Nova proc, because it just does ridiculous damage when you do it like that, which I'll go into detail during the nuance section. And this is your basic burn phase. Pop all cooldowns. For 15 seconds you spam as much as you can, you evocate your mana back up, and then you go into sustain phase. Now, the sustain phase is basically you trying to maintain your mana. So I'm just gonna give an example of that. Now we're gonna start doing some Arcane Blasts just to show you. Now, as you can see, this is my percentage of mana, and I want to keep it somewhere between 93 and 83. The thing is, for each arcane charge you have, your Arcane Blasts are going to cost more mana. As you can see, on 4 charges they cost 16k mana. Now, seeing everyone has a mana pool of 160k, that means each Arcane Blast is exactly 10% of your mana pool. Arcane Missiles, for that matter, don't cost any mana at all, and allow you to regen mana while you are channeling them. Basically that means that you want to build up to 4 stacks and then like drop to like 80% mana and then drop your stacks with Arcane Barrage, and then if you have Arcane Missiles you can use that to regen some mana back up, do another 4 charged Arcane Blast and reset again. And now why this may be hard is if you don't pay attention to your mana pool, you will drop below that threshold I mentioned and you will lose a lot of DPS. So you generally want to keep it around 93-83%, and that means if you have 4 stacks of arcane charges and you don't have 93% mana, that means you shouldn't start casting a new Arcane Blast.
The city will be cleansed.
So that way you can always keep your mana and you just drop the charges if you don't have any Arcane Missile charges, so you can keep your mana at a decent level and maximize your sustained damage. As you see, Arcane Barrage also can proc Arcane Missiles, and yeah.
What are we if not slaves to this torment?
Now, as far as it goes, what to do if you like lose too much mana. Let's say you drop really low, like let's say 65%. You can just stand still. That's one option. But another option is like keep casting, keep activity up, and don't go above 2 charges until you reach a decent amount of mana again. Plus it will allow you to get some Arcane Missiles again, and like right now I fairly quickly sustained back up my my mana, and I can keep casting, and it's just like that. Now when it comes to spell priority, generally if you're building up stacks you do not want to use Arcane Missiles. Arcane Missiles are important because they do, just like Arcane Blast, they do more damage the more Arcane charges you have. But if you are building charges and you have 3 charges of Arcane Missiles, it's better to drop one of them, because you'll still need to do a couple of more Arcane Blasts to get up to the 4 charges that are needed to get the max damage, and you might get another proc, and you do not want to waste those procs on the stacks of the Arcane Missiles. So you might as well drop 1 charge and keep it on 2 while you're building, and then you'll probably get a 3rd. And even if you don't, it doesn't really matter, because you still have 2 charges that allows you to sustain it a little bit longer and still have a fair amount of chance to get another extra or even a second extra charge while you're at 4 charges. So in general, this is how you want to go about it. Now that's basically it, the sustain phase. Keep track of your mana, keep track of your charges, keep track of your arcane charges and your arcane missile charges, and adjust your rotation accordingly. There's no fixed rotation, it's just a checklist. Do I have arcane missiles? Where is my mana at? Can I do an arcane blast now? Yes, no, no, do the arcane missiles. I don't have arcane missiles. Drop the stacks and start building again and hope on procs. That's about it. Getting into my weak auras, obviously you can see the arcane missile charges here. This is my Mark of the War Song proc. I can see the timer by the thing going around, and the numbers display the amount of stacks, because Mark of the War Song starts with 10 stacks and then it starts dropping as the buff progresses. We have the arcane power here, ice flows charges, what's called ice barrier cooldown, Doom Nova proc on your target, And this is the Shadow Moon insignia thing, the Council Mastery Trinket. I use this on Gorfiend because you're not allowed to use Prophecy of Fear on Mythic Gorfiend, so I also have this in here. Cooldown for my Crystal, cooldown for my Presence of Mind, and my Evocation cooldown, and my Great Invisibility cooldown. There are a few things like Supernova. If I spec into that, it replaces that bit, and if I spec into Evanescence, it will go here where the Ice Flows is. So basically, depending on what you're spec into, it will change it on its own. So and you also saw the little box thingy for the Rune of Power, making it blue if you're standing in it, and making it red if you're standing outside of it, which is really nice. Enough about the weak auras. Now let's get into some of the nuances. Now, for the burn phase, you want to start with your crystal because you just want to get as much damage into the crystal as you can, and then ending it with either a explosion onto the crystal or just with massive damage. Now, as you can see, let me just stay in combat. These are my weak auras for the what's it called? For the Incantus flow. So when it's on the red, it's only 1 stack, and when it's on the green, it has 5 stacks, and that means that it goes here, it's 4% extra damage, and when it's here, it's 20% extra damage. Now, if you're running with this, the big nuance part about it is that, like, generally you want to, like, if you're doing your burn phase and you're pumping Arcane Blasts, like a lot of them, into your crystal, as it's building up to here, you will get a cast off here, right? That's 1 Arcane Blast. You'll be able to cast another Arcane Blast and do Presence of Mind Arcane Blast on top of it. So that means you'll do 3 Arcane Blasts that have 20% damage increase. So that's a little bit nuance on if you're using what's it called? If you're using Incantus Flow, generally you want to, if you're using Incantus Flow, you want to, on your crystal, you want to do a 3rd Arcane Blast on the 20% mark with the Presence of Mind. If you're running with Rune of Power, what you want to do is, if you see that this is going to be your last possible cast on the crystal before it runs out, as you can see, it has a resource bar that ticks down. And so, like, let's say you're casting and it's about here, you want to, and it's going to finish its cast here, you want to Presence of Mind and Rune of Power instantaneously, sorry, not Rune of Power, Presence of Mind and Arcane Blast instantaneously at the end to get as much Arcane Blasts into the crystal as you can. The nuance for the Prophecy of Fear. Now, the Prophecy of Fear is very interesting because it says 17k damage here on the target it is, but the thing is, this scales with the amount of spell power you have and other stats and stuff like that. So raid buffed, for me, it does about 25k damage a tick on the crystal. Now, this is why you want to prioritize Arcane Missiles over Arcane Blasts on the crystal when you have that proc on the crystal, or on the target for that matter, because for 1 cast of Arcane Missiles will the channel lasts for 1.5 to 1.3 seconds for me, depending on procs, time warp, stuff like that, but generally it's somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 seconds on the Arcane Missiles. That means if you have 3 charges of Arcane Missiles, the Arcane Missiles itself will hit the target 15 times during a time of 4.2 to 4.5 seconds out of the 10 seconds of the trinket proc itself, meaning it will do at the very least for me 375k damage within that time span. And those procs can also crit, and if you multi-strike on the target, it will do the 30% multi-strike damage as well. But let's just focus on crits right now. If every single one of those 15 would crit, that's a 750k damage within 4.2 to 4.5 seconds. So rotationally wise, like if you have it on the crystal, or even in your sustain phase, if it fits to put an arcane missile in there, it's good to prioritize it. Like if you're not at 100% mana, you should be doing a arcane missile on the Doom Nova proc target, because the damage even on single target is just amazing. Now the thing is, the nuance on why do we run with haste and not with mastery as our main stat, and it has to do with the 6.2 patch changes. In 6.2 they changed the fact that the mastery effectiveness, like the amount of rating in mastery you have, got nerfed by 8%. So that's reason number 1. It's not the biggest reason, but it did affect your mastery quite a bit. So there was actually a point where I had rate buffed more mastery during 6.1 than I do right now, even though I have probably more mastery right now than I did during 6.1. But the biggest reason why we run with haste is the class trinket and the 2-set 4-set bonus. The 2-set 4-set bonus, the faster you can get rid of those arcane missiles, the more times you can spam them if you have the charges, and because your other spells cast faster, it will proc more often in general. Plus your class trinket already lowers the global cooldown of your arcane blast. It increases its damage. It just allows you to get more arcane blasts into your crystal than if you would be running with everything with mastery. Now mastery is still a important secondary stat. It is the the most important secondary stat, but mainly you want to get a lot of haste, because it's just all about pumping in the damage during that burn phase. Now, like I said, most of your damage will happen during the burn phase, and for me, like if a fight lasts for like 5 minutes, I will only have about 3 burn phases, but it's within those 45 seconds. Did I calculate that correctly? Yeah, 45 seconds of me using my cooldowns and getting all those all 3 of those ring thingies, legendary ring explosions. This is where most of my damage comes from. Like, technically you would still do good damage if you would only cast during your burn phase, but it's still important to maintain a good sustain phase, to not let your mana drop low, because that will up your sustain damage and not your push damage, your burn damage. So generally speaking, you just want to keep an eye out on your mana during the sustain phase and keep it at a good level so that your damage is still fairly decent, and then burn as much and spam as much during your burn phase, and then get your mana back up with evocation, and that's it. It's really easy. The only thing you need to do is manage your mana by knowing how much mana this next Arcane Blast is gonna do, and where your mana will be at after that, and if you do a Arcane Missiles after that, where your mana will be then because of the regen, and is it viable to cast another Arcane Blast, or do you need to drop your charges? It's all about practicing the sustain phase and getting those small nuances, the trinket procs, the rotational choices you make during the sustain and even the burn phase, depending on the trinket procs, correctly to increase your DPS even more than you're already doing. Like I said at the start, doing a lot of damage with Arcane Mage is really easy purely because of the burn phase, but it's just the sustain phase you need to get used to, you need to pay attention to, and you need to form properly. Other than that, it's all about pumping in how fast can you push Arcane Blast during your burn phase. It's a fairly easy spec to play. It's just that the sustain phase is very punishing if you do not pay attention. Well, that's it for the guide. I hope I haven't bored you too much. It's a lot of detail to very small things that only affect it in a very small way, but generally speaking, this does work really well. There's also a way to blow up the ring onto the crystal, and the way you do that is by popping the crystal and arcane power when you have 2 arcane charges, and then you build up to another 4 and then drop the crystal, and then start spamming on your crystal, and you will get technically a 15% extra damage of the ring explosion than you normally would have. So it's only a small DPS increase, and it's a bit hard to time mid-fight, especially if you are not the one in control of the ring. So generally, once ring is popped, you just want to start popping your cooldowns and have 4 charges ready to start spamming on the target. Other than that, it's just very important to keep your sustain phase. I will put a link to my weak auras, obviously with the... Normally my weak auras only show in combat, and that's how they are posted. It will be in the description. I hope you guys liked the video and learned something new about Arcane Mages. See you guys.